Hi, all. It's so wonderful to see such a large attendance and so many participants today. I will tell you that I've been involved in the immigrant support efforts since last year when I did a lot of the direct outreach. I think I picked up donations from many of your homes and distributed them to our newcomer community in Denver. And then ultimately, early this year, I became aware of an organization called the Immigrant Protection Team. It's an expansive network now with 25 teams across the state of Colorado. It's been a lifesaver for me. And I will just say, I was telling Jenna that in addition to the outreach that we provide, personally, I'll tell you that I say it has provided whatever level of sanity I have, because it gives me purpose, and many of us who are involved in these efforts. So on that note, I'm extremely pleased to introduce Jenna McAfee, who is actually based here in Boulder County. However, she is the founder of the entire Immigrant Protection Team organization and network. So let's give a warm welcome to Jenna.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. I am very honored. I have to say that I grew up mostly in a First Congregational Church. I went to one in Greeley when my parents moved there when I was in elementary school, and then I left after high school. But that whole time I was in the First Congregational Church of Greeley, even though a lot of the background previous and in my ancestors has been with the Presbyterian Church. So I feel akin to the First Congregational Church. And as Kristen mentioned, we started the Immigrant Protection Teams shortly after the election. We knew that I was a volunteer with Coloradans for Immigrant Rights at the time, and had been for almost 10 years. The Coloradans for Immigrant Rights is an organization that is run by the American Friends Service Committee. And if you've done any immigrant rights work in the Denver metro area, you will know that AFSC is one of the leaders of the immigrant rights work that's done in Colorado. Anyway, after the election, Jennifer Piper and I were talking, and we just agreed that we need to ramp up the volunteer work that we do for immigrants in the state. We originally anticipated that the immigrant protection teams would be just focused in Aurora and Denver, but then it became apparent after we kind of got it going that there was a need to expand statewide. So at this point we have, I don't even know how many volunteers, I'd guess 1,500 to 2,000 volunteers spread all across the state. So there are groups doing different things in different jurisdictions. But today, my charge is to give you a little bit of background, and it will be only a little bit of background because the subject of immigration is incredibly complex. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I think I have a slide. So today I want to cover at least, to a certain level, the following topics. First, how does the U.S. immigration system work? What are the history of our immigration laws, how they came about? Secondly, are the options for coming here the right way? Because you'll hear that frequently. People will say, why didn't they just come here the right way, come here the legal way? So we'll talk about what are the options for coming the legal way. Next, we have several slides, and this was one of the primary purposes of the immigrant protection teams from the beginning, was to correct the many misconceptions about immigrants. My guess is that most of what you've heard in the media, most of what you've heard from various sources is wrong about immigrants. So we have, and there's tons of research that backs that information up. And Kristen has a number of handouts over on the table. One of those is, and some of you may have that at your tables, one of those is talking about the truths about immigrants. So we'll have several slides that describe that. Then we'll talk about the situation in Colorado, which is, somewhat better than the federal situation in terms, we do have laws that protect immigrants in Colorado. So I'll spend a bit of time talking about that. The last part of the presentation is to talk about action. And I agree with Kristen about, for me personally, if I can take action, if I know I'm taking some sort of action about something that disturbs me, something that I'm fearful about. I think the quote is, action is the best antidote to despair. And that's what I really felt after the first Trump election and now after the second one. It's like, I need to take action. So I'll just very briefly discuss a couple of things that you can do right away. Kristen has a handout about that, and then I know that in 2 weeks you have another session where she will go into more detail about action. Whoops. So the first part of this is just giving a little bit of background about the U.S. immigration system. This slide just identifies different eras in the United States. And the interesting part about that, at least for me, when I really learned about the history of immigration law and policy in the United States, is that first of all, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, it was all formulated to support capitalism. It's all of our immigration laws and policies are set up to support the people that are in power. And the interesting thing for me to learn is that we have a whole series. We did the first law actually said that naturalized citizens are limited to free white persons. But the rest of the laws that we have, and that one obviously is exclusionary, then after that we just created law after law after law that were all exclusionary. In 1882, shortly after the Civil War, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what we needed to do as a society was we had been using, free labor up until, the Civil War. We needed to replicate that. In order for our system of capitalism to continue, we needed to create second-class citizens who could be paid less, who could be expected to work more, who could be expected to work under worse conditions. So we did that through immigration, through limiting the people who could come here, to limiting the people who could become naturalized citizens. We brought in people of color, basically, and had them work at the lowest levels of our society, and then limited their options to move into higher levels of society. And that's what, most of our immigration policy has been about, is kind of reinforcing that particular pattern. So in 1882, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. In 1924 was the next major Immigration Act, where we had we had quotas for people of different national origins. This was reinforced. There were a number of policy changes, and you'll see this littered throughout the immigration history, that we do have laws for immigration, but we also have a ton of just changes in policy that make a dramatic effect on how we treat people. The last two immigration laws, which again further restricted which people could come from what countries, were in 1965 and 1986. And after that, we stopped with the laws because it was too hard to try to come up with consensus among the two parties. And by the way, this is both the Democratic and the Republican administrations that created these laws and policies. It's not one administration. It's like each administration tries to one-up the last one, make it harder and harder and harder and more demeaning and hurtful to immigrants. So it's all based on reinforcing our capitalist society. And it's never been, this is kind of the bottom line, it's never been race neutral. Our immigration policies have always set it up so that there is one race, and you could guess which race it is, has benefited from those policies. So I think now, I'm going to try it. Okay, yeah, I'm going to try it this way. So I have trouble standing in one spot. So the first part of that, I did need to read my notes because I couldn't quite remember all those laws and when they came about. The second piece of this, coming closer to where we are currently in our history, is what happened after NAFTA. You guys probably all remember NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which had some impacts that, it's hard to know if these were deliberate or if they were unintentional. But some of the impacts were that we heavily subsidized crops that were grown in Mexico, which made it harder for small Mexican farmers to continue to grow those crops in Mexico successfully. So there was more of a reason for the Mexican laborers and farmers to cross over the border. And initially, and for decades, this happened freely. There were no reason to control it. There was no particular concern about this free movement across the border. But then what happened is that we combined NAFTA with these very, first of all, with ramped up border enforcement. And what it did, basically, the enforcement was targeted to certain locations where we put a lot of, at that time, they were, I believe, INS agents, people to control the border crossing. Anyway, it was very deliberate that what we were doing was forcing the migrants to come across the border in the most dangerous spots. And there have been books written about this. We actually have a book, a list of recommended books if you want to check into that. This was a very deliberate policy choice. It was called prevention through deterrence. And basically, we thought what it would mean is that the immigrants would stop coming. But that's not what it meant. What it meant is that immigrants continued to come, they just died in much greater numbers. And this was a deliberate choice of the US government during that time frame. So this slide just shows The areas in red are the areas of ramped up enforcement. You know, it used to be that people came into El Paso, they came into San Diego, they came into Tucson, but instead we did this ramped up enforcement in those areas, which forced the migrants to travel through the most dangerous parts of the desert and the mountains. So not only did this increase the deaths, it also increased the opportunities, which are still going on today, for high-priced coyotes to help people, you know, come through that area. So it created a whole nother system of commercialization of the migration. And you know, and during that time frame, there obviously was a reduction in this, what we called circular migration, which is people coming to our country to help out during the summer and then going back to Mexico during the winter. And then after 9/11, there were a whole bunch of other changes that were made in our immigration system. We basically used this as an opportunity to further clamp down on immigrants. We use the whole fear of national security and terrorism as a way to be more exclusionary in our immigration policies. What happened after 9/11 is that they abolished the Immigration and Naturalization Service and turned it instead into the Department of Homeland Security, which consists of the Customs and Border Protection, ICE, which is what we're mostly familiar with because we live in what they call the interior. If we lived on, you know, the coasts or down by the border, we would be hearing a lot more about CBP. And then USCIS, which is actually the agency that is supposed to help people come through their citizenship process. So we broke INS up to these three agencies. Two of them focus on enforcement. So we're pouring a lot more money into immigration enforcement than we used to. We also substantially increased border security. You know, I don't know if any of you have been down to the border recently, but it's sort of shocking, I think, what's happened to an area of our country that used to be, you know, a joint piece of land where people from two different countries shared resources. There is a lot of, my background is actually in natural resources protection. The border itself is actually a really good resource for wildlife habitat. Anyway, at this point, it's just, and this started right after 9/11 to substantially increase border security. And then we also made visas much harder to get, had much more scrutiny on those. You probably remember the Patriot Act. That again provided another vehicle for us to use immigration to control people who were coming into the country. We also, and this did affect Colorado, we also provided the opportunity and the funding for ICE to collaborate with local governments through what are called 287G agreements. This is actually a mechanism that's currently being used across the country at this point in time, except for in Colorado. It is now illegal in Colorado to have these 287G agreements. But you can't, ICE can be much more effective if they have the cooperation of local law enforcement. So that's what the 287G agreements did. And then we also had much more reduced refugee admissions. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the difference between like asylum seekers and refugees. Refugees are people from another country who are designated as refugees when they are in their country. That means that they have special permission to come to the United States. Asylum seekers, on the other hand, have to be in this country in order to say that they would like to be considered for asylum. So that's the primary difference between refugees and asylum seekers. I'm not going to go over this, obviously, but I did want to just say that, and you probably, this is not a surprise to any of you, but there's a substantially increased ramping up of federal executive orders, laws. Even, there has been one law passed in this new administration. There are numerous changes in procedure and different policies that are being enacted right now. Some of these have, and in fact, I would say probably the majority, these are executive orders and policy changes, things like use of the Alien Enemies Act to justify deporting people to a third country. That's on this list. Other things are like the, saying that you can't, there's no more such thing as birthright citizenship. That's on this list. So these are all changes that have happened in the last 6 months or so. And many of them are either in the courts or have been stopped or delayed by the courts. So many of these are not taking place, but as you know, there's a lot of stuff that is taking place. And then we have the most recent legislation passed by the House and Senate and then signed into law. This H.R. 1, also called the One Big Beautiful Bill, or words to that effect. This, you've probably heard about the changes to Medicaid and SNAP benefits from this bill. This bill also, it was just shocking, in my mind, the things that it allows the federal government to do on the subject of immigration. I mean, just a dramatic increase in funding for DHS agencies. I think an increase of $45 billion. I mean, that's just, you can't even fathom that. Expanded expedited removal of immigrants. Expedited removal is this particular category that if you've been in the country for 2 years or less, you can be put in what category of expedited removal, which means that that ICE and DHS can deport you without much due process at all. It also, as I mentioned, the word here is co-opted state and local law enforcement. Luckily, we have state laws in Colorado that have, I would say not stopped that, definitely not stopped it, but have definitely made this less likely to be an issue in Colorado. Tightened asylum and unaccompanied minor protections so that it's harder for some very vulnerable populations to be protected. And just sharply increased fees for immigration. So that was all in that H.R. 1 bill that was passed. So what really are the options that we have for coming to this country? And this slide, it's very, very complicated. Obviously, you can't read it, but what it illustrates down the left side are the extremely few options that immigrants have for coming into the country legally. Extremely few options. The first two listed there are only if you have family living in the country, who are either, that family member has to be either a U.S. citizen or has to have a green card. And then the third option is if you have a particular skill. And you can come in if you're a genius, or if you have, if you have unusual athletic abilities. Those are just some of the examples. It's just unfathomable to me, how restrictive that we allow for people to come in and become actual citizens of this country. I have some personal experience with a friend who did marry a U.S. citizen, and he also, I would say, has some specific skills. One of the things I'll talk to a little bit later in the slideshow is how important immigrants are to our economy. And I actually happen to come from a profession where I worked in an engineering company, and you would not believe the lack of American-born engineers we have. I mean, our students are not choosing to go into engineering. It's too difficult, I guess. I don't really know exactly why that is. But anyway, this individual had a degree in electrical engineering. He did all the right things to come in as a spouse of a U.S. citizen. And what it says up there, clear over here, it says, after 5 years, and you've gotten a green card, you're eligible to become a citizen. And then what it says next is, after you file your naturalization papers and endure 6 to 12 months of processing delays, you can take a language and civics test, pass it, and you're a citizen. So I want to tell you exactly what happened in his case. He did everything correctly. And after 18 months, after he had submitted his naturalization papers, after 18 months, it's, in that slide up there says 6 to 12 months, he went into the USCIS office and he said, what's the deal here? Why is this taking so long? And they just said, it's in the background check process. We can't give you any more information than that. And he said, well, can you give me a time frame? Can you tell me if there's any particular holdup? Is there anything I can do to try to move things along? And they said no. But what was interesting is that an employee of that office, as he was getting ready to leave, came up to him and spoke to him in another language, a language that he knew, and she told him, they discriminate against people from this country, and you're not going to get this unless you hire an attorney. And most people, that would be the end of the process for them. So even though this chart says that it should not be an issue, there is so much discretion, there's so much arbitrary. In the field that I was in before this, we used to talk about things that were arbitrary and capricious. And this was definitely arbitrary. There was absolutely no reason for his process to be taking that long. And had this employee not come up and told him that she knew, what they were doing was wrong, he wouldn't have known that he needed to hire an attorney. So he did hire an attorney. He was able to get to the interview stage, and even at the interview stage, the people from the USCIS office, and by this time this couple were in Denver. The people at that USCIS office tried, the guy in charge tried to get him to commit perjury. Asking him ridiculous questions that, luckily at this point he had hired an attorney, and the attorney said, don't answer anything unless you absolutely know, the answer. They wanted him to recite all of his addresses of places he had lived since coming to the country, and that was like 15 years ago, and he couldn't do that. So anyway, this agent was just, without any reason, slowing down the process. And at the end of the interview, when they normally say you can go to the naturalization ceremony this afternoon, the agent said, we don't approve this and you can't advance. luckily the attorney was there and really started pressing this guy until he realized, okay, well, I guess this guy has an attorney and I can't keep doing this. But if you think of all of the other people who've been trying to go through this process, they would have just given up at that point. So anyway, that's just one example of how difficult it is to become a naturalized citizen. It's just, for most people, there is no path. So when people talk about coming here the right way, for most people, there's no path to do that. So with family-based, I saw a couple of hands. As a reminder, we're gonna take questions at the end. For family-based immigration, the wait times can be unbelievably long. It could take over 23 years if you're sponsoring a sibling from Mexico. The employment-based immigration, and again, I worked for an engineering company. We did sponsor some immigrants who could come here. Now they're making it prohibitively expensive. 100,000 exactly to do that kind of thing. For refugees and asylees, the Trump administration has basically cut off the refugee program, except that I was doing some research yesterday. I noticed that they did allow the South Africans in under a refugee program. So, yeah. But for asylees, it's also a very difficult process. I have personal knowledge of a couple of asylum seekers who came to this country. First of all, the way we treated them was absolutely horrific. I mean, we treated them like animals. And these were people coming to our country for protection. They were both trans women from Central America. So the asylee program is extremely difficult to get through. There is still something called a diversity visa lottery, which actually excludes people from the 3 countries where we get the most immigrants. So that's helpful. The real key challenge here is that there's virtually no process if you are low income or low skilled individual, even though our country is desperate for workers. So there are about, we estimate around 48 million immigrants in the United States. These are people that are both undocumented and documented. Around 11 million are total or undocumented. And the interesting statistic, to me anyway, is that, and this is true, I mean, just my own personal knowledge is that a lot of undocumented people are in what we call mixed status families. That means that one person is documented and the other person is undocumented. And the estimate is that there are around 70 million children, citizen children in the United States who lives in a mixed status family. So if you can imagine the fear of those children living in those families, that they might come home from school and one of their parents might be gone. So that's one thing that people frequently don't think about, is the number of mixed status families in Colorado and in the United States. So who can become a naturalized U.S. citizen? There's an age requirement. You have to go through what's called a green card process, and you have to have held that green card for a certain amount of time. You have to demonstrate continuous residence in the country, in the U.S., for a period of time. That means no visiting your relatives in, Central America or wherever your relatives might be. You have to exhibit good moral character. Who is it that determines that? That's what I want to know. You have to be able to read, write, and speak basic English. which is a real difficulty for some immigrants. You have to be able to pass a civics test, and I was just reading recently that they've greatly expanded this test and tried to make it harder for people to pass. And you have to show that you understand the Constitution and are willing to abide by it. I'll guess what that laughter is, but I won't comment. So now I wanted to go, this is a part of the presentation where I just want to go relatively quickly, and again, you have a handout on your table about this. These are all of the facts about immigrants that may be different from what you've read in the media or in other sources recently. First of all, undocumented immigrants pay taxes. In fact, I saw some research recently that having undocumented immigrants in our system paying taxes, they pay into Medicare, they pay into Social Security, and they're never going to be able to access those funds. Anyway, the research I saw was just that they were a primary reason that the United States didn't get affected as much by the COVID pandemic from an economic standpoint as other countries. So we have a vast network, 11 million, of undocumented immigrants who are paying taxes. So they pay taxes. They fill critical labor shortages. I mean, we've all read about the farmers and the other agricultural workers, a dairy farmer who no longer has anybody to milk their cows. The construction industry is very dependent on undocumented immigrants. The industry that I came from, which is engineering, I went to my son's graduation. He got a master's degree from CSU. And I went and I was just looking at the list of the names of people who were getting electrical engineering jobs or electrical engineering degrees. There were no American names on that list. It was all foreign. I have a friend who's a professor of civil engineering at Metro State, or maybe it's UCD, I don't know. Anyway, he told me that in certain engineering fields, there are virtually no Americans. So we are desperate for engineers who are immigrants. Computer science, all of the tech degrees, we are heavily dependent on immigrants. So not only in very kind of low-skilled parts of the economy, but also in very highly skilled parts of the economy. We are dependent on immigrants. It is simply not correct that they are taking jobs away from Americans. I just went through several slides describing why you can't just come here the right way. The legal immigration options are extremely limited, they're expensive, and extremely time-consuming. The immigrants definitely fuel our economy. In 2023, there's a group in Colorado that I can't remember their name right now, but they keep really good track of the economic contributions of immigrants in Colorado. In 2023, immigrant-led households had $23.1 billion in spending power for Colorado. They're absolutely essential to our economy. And as I already mentioned, that most immigrants are not eligible for public benefits, even though they pay into those systems. There was a rumor that the immigrants that are coming to our country are criminals. Immigrants come to our country for many, many reasons. They're fleeing persecution in their own countries, they're fleeing wars in their own countries, they're coming here for economic reasons. They're coming here because they're, several of their family members are here already and they want to reunify. I volunteered for a couple of years for Casa de Paz. And I don't know if you know what Casa de Paz is, but it's an organization in Denver that, assuming immigrants are getting released from the geo-detention facility in Aurora, which at this point in time isn't happening, but in the past they were releasing people. And Casa de Paz would have volunteers meet immigrants as they came out of that geo-detention facility and help them, first of all, be kind to them. And I had one immigrant tell me that he assumed that everybody in America was hateful and unfriendly until he met the volunteers with Casa de Paz. He said that was the first time an American had actually been kind to him. So anyway, we meet them, we provide them with food, we provide them with backpacks with clothing in them, and we help them connect to family members. And every single immigrant I worked with during that period of time had family members in the United States. Every single one of them. So that all they had to do was just connect to that family member and then purchase either a bus ticket or an airplane ticket to go to New Jersey or California or wherever that family member was. So a lot of them come to this country because they have family members here. Most immigrants are not criminals. By far, the largest proportion of criminals who are arrested, charged, or convicted with a crime are U.S. citizens. So, the garbage you read tying immigrants to our crime rate or tying immigrants to violent crime is just simply not true. And for all of these, there's been tons of research to back up all of these statements. So I think we have some research on our handouts over there. Actually, the Cato Institute, that liberal bastion, they have a lot of research that they've done on immigrants. Sanctuary policies actually make our communities safer and more prosperous. That's been well documented. Being undocumented itself is a civil violation. There's nothing criminal about it. So saying that someone who's undocumented is a criminal just by virtue of being undocumented is not a correct statement. Drugs are brought over the border by U.S. citizens. Immigrants are not involved in drug smuggling. Mass deportations, there's some who believe that mass deportations would help our economy somehow. It's hard to figure out how that would help, but there's been research done showing massive impacts to our economy if mass deportations really ramp up. And we're already starting to see that. And finally, immigrants are drivers of innovation. There are many, many companies that are owned by immigrants. In fact, 44% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants or their children. That's 224 of the most successful corporations in America were founded by immigrants. So that's a lot of factual information about immigrants. And again, we have handouts that provide some of that information as well. So from a statewide perspective, and I am a native Coloradan, so I kind of watched all this happen. As I assume most of you know that Colorado is relatively only recently a trifecta, which means that all the two House, or the House and the Senate and the governorship are all Democratic. Prior to that point in time, Colorado really had some pretty negative laws and policies that affected immigration. We were, I believe, the first state to have the show your papers law, which basically meant that local law enforcement could stop someone based on who knows what they looked like, how they were driving, maybe the age of the vehicle they were driving. They could stop someone and ask for their immigration papers. And what happened in 2013 is that the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition and other immigrant rights coalitions across the state started talking to local sheriffs around the state to find out, was this law helping your community? Were you experiencing lower crime rates because of this crime or because of this law? And really, without exception, the local sheriffs they talked to said this law is really inhibiting my ability to build trust in the community. And if you look at the research, if a community has trust in their local law enforcement, they're much more apt to, call the police if they witness a crime or if they're victims of a crime. And if they're afraid of the police, they won't do that. So anyway, in 2013, the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition brought these sheriffs in to testify, and by this time there was a Democratic trifecta in the state, and we were able to overturn that show your papers law. So beginning in 2013, and continuing really through including this session, we have passed, I think it's over 30 pro-immigrant laws in the state. And that includes, laws, actually the best slide, yeah. The laws that we currently have in place prohibit local law enforcement from signing a 287G agreement with the federal government, which is crucial right now to assure the safety of immigrants in our state. It also provides undocumented immigrants with access to a lot of benefits and enhances the protection of undocumented immigrants across our state. There's a new state agency, relatively new state agency called the Office for New Americans. So that was established recently. Kristen and I and a few other people in this room, I think, were instrumental in passage of, and this was just in this legislative session, this past legislative session, Senate Bill 25-276, which provides a number of additional protections for immigrants in our state. And this is one of the things that the immigrant protection teams did, is to go down to the state legislature and testify in support of passage of this law. We were also involved in advocating with certain legislators that were determined to, we weren't quite certain if they were going to be supportive, so we got our members across the state to contact those people if they were in their district. Anyway, Senate Bill 25-276 provides a lot more protections for immigrants. I'll just mention a couple other things, and that is that luckily our AG's office is monitoring whether or not local law enforcement actually does cooperate with ICE. And there was one incident in Mesa County a couple of months ago where it was pretty clear that local law enforcement was cooperating with ICE, and our AG's office sued that individual, and that individual has now left the Mesa County Sheriff's Office. So we're really happy that the AG's office is actually willing to enforce the law. we are also, the immigrant protection teams are also involved in resisting. ICE wants to reopen correctional facilities. It's mostly reopen correctional facilities that are currently vacant and turn them into immigrant detention facilities. And I don't know if folks are aware, but over 70% of people in our immigrant detention facilities right now, this is a nationwide figure, have not been accused of a crime, they haven't been convicted of a crime, they have no connection with any kind of crimes. So we're just, jailing and separating people from their families, jailing people who have no criminal conviction at all. And so we're actively involved in trying to resist these detention facilities, which kind of gets now to the action part of this. And again, I don't plan to really go through these slides. Kristen has handouts over here, and I know that 2 weeks from now, you're planning to have a discussion specifically about action. The main thing I will mention is that we have an active immigrant protection team in Boulder County that currently has various working groups doing different activities to either continue to spread the word about the myths that surround immigrants, continue to provide direct support for immigrants, including through things like responding to ICE raids, which there have been some in Boulder County, handing out Know Your Rights information to businesses and individuals. And Kristen has some of those cards over here on the table. They also have the phone number for the ICE hotline. And if any of you ever see ICE activity happening, please put that hotline in your phone and call that number, because that's the official way that we confirm whether or not there's ICE activity in the area. Yeah, right. It's called the Colorado Rapid Response Network. And again, Kristen has that on the cards over there. And also, we also do advocacy at the local level, state level, and federal level to try to get laws and policies established that are more supportive of our immigrant population. We believe that our community will be stronger if our immigrant population feels safe and is able to contribute to society. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. I think at this point we'll find out if there are questions that people have. Questions? Yes?
Do you know of any effort in the Colorado legislature to pass a bill similar to that in California that prevents ICE from wearing masks?
It passed.
No. Well, in California it did. Yeah, the question was, are we aware of any similar push in the state legislature to pass laws similar to what were just passed in California, just signed into law a couple of days ago in Colorado. And I already reached out to my State House member, who's Leslie Smith. Some of you may have her as well, I don't know. And she told me, because I had asked this, the laws, by the way, provide two protections that we think are essential. One of them is that ICE officials identify themselves. This ridiculousness of kidnapping people without even knowing who's kidnapping you is clearly against due process. And also that ICE officials not wear a mask to camouflage who they actually are. I had actually asked the state legislature about this a couple of months ago. Can't we do something? And she said, no, we can't We can't do that because it's, you know, the state trying to tell the feds what to do. But now that California has done it, what the legislature, my understanding is, what they're thinking of is that they will, you know, monitor what is happening in California. They expect that the legislation will be tested in court, but there is a group of legislators right now who are looking to advance similar legislation. So I'm very pleased about that. So contact your legislature, say you think this is a great idea. Yes?
And do you think we should have immigration? Do you think we should control immigration? There was a Soviet prime minister by the name of Olaf Palme in 19...
Let me take this back just a
I'll try to be as loud as I can. There was a Soviet prime minister by the name of Olaf Palme in the 1970s who led in 1 million immigrants, Somalis, you know, and he was, it backfired on him. He was assassinated by a Somali immigrant. Do you think that we should have control immigration? Do you think we should select it? Do you think we should control our immigration policy?
So the question is controlling immigrants something that we want to do? You know, as a nation, should we be controlling the numbers of people that come in, people from different nationalities, which is what we're doing right now. I mean, right now, it is virtually impossible to come into this country. My personal belief is that we should not, except for certain circumstances, that our country needs to be welcoming the stranger. Our country, you know, the birth rate is declining. We need immigrants to come in and provide support where, you know, it used to be that, you know, a family would have 5 children to take over the, you know, all the tasks of the farm, and we don't have that anymore. I mean, there are a lot of young people who are choosing not to have children. So I personally think that we need immigrants to just provide the basic labor that we need in the United States. You know, and this, now I'm speaking about my own again, this is probably all my personal experience. I have greatly benefited from interacting with people from other countries, learning about the cultures of other countries, the foods of other countries. You know, I believe it makes us stronger as a society to have that kind of, you know, we've always been a mix, I forget exactly what the terminology is, but a pool of mixing of different nationalities in this country. And I also believe it's the right thing to do from a moral perspective. We're going to have, because of climate change, we're going to have, you know, if you look worldwide, there's going to be more and more pressure of immigrants, people needing to move to get away from the most severe climate change. And I believe, as a, you know, Presbyterian in my blood, as a Congregationalist, as I was raised in Greeley, I believe that we have a moral obligation to welcome the stranger. I do. And you know, I think that we can develop laws, that are much more humane, much more welcoming. I mean, I have watched, again, I'm speaking from my experience in engineering, I have watched the engineering students are not coming to the United States anymore. What are we going to do when we don't have people who know how to maintain our electrical systems? So those are my personal feelings. I think it's, you know, I think cutting off immigration is the wrong solution for our country. Yes.
Sort of to Roger's point, I think one of the things that's a challenge in this country is that we have not been able to pass comprehensive immigration
Right.
reform. George W. Bush tried to push it through, and his Republican colleagues held it up in the House and the Senate. And so without that, without having comprehensive immigration reform that does sort of, take compassion into account as well as the national need, I think, we're going to continue to face this conundrum.
I agree completely. The fact that we have not been able to pass comprehensive immigration reform is just despicable. There was a bill on the table right before Trump was elected that was bipartisan. Even that couldn't get passed. And I personally was against that bill because it had some pretty negative impacts on immigrants in this country. But it would have been something anyway. It is, I guess I'm encouraged right now because there's a really big backlash against what is happening currently in this country related to immigration. The polls are showing that people are changing their minds about immigrants. Something like almost 80%, I believe, of Americans polled said that they believe immigrants are good for the country. And that's a huge change. So I guess I'm an optimist by nature, but I am optimistic that when some of the cloud and chaos of this current period clears, that there will be a push toward comprehensive immigration reform. I think this country is realizing that we need immigrants in our population. Are there any other questions? Yes. They're assigned a tax ID number, and then they are required to pay into Social Security, sales tax, all of the basic taxes. Yeah. Yeah.
Can't get a paycheck without paying taxes.
That's true. Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment. Recently, our daughter got married, and we got 4 beautiful step-grandchildren that are from the Lakota Flandry Reservation in South Dakota. And so I'm getting to know them and their worldview, and I realized that we're all, I think, all of us on land that wasn't ours. And I'm the great-granddaughter of indentured servants from Denmark. So I'm a very proud daughter of immigrants. But just about all of us we're on land that's not ours.
Yeah, we were all immigrants, except unless we were, unless our ancestors were Native Americans. Yeah.
This is just what, not related to any of the questions asked, but something that I learned when Jenna was really underscoring the point of how challenging it is to seek asylum, for instance, and there's not enough time to go into that, but I'm close with a particular family, Venezuelan family in Denver, and when they told me, you need to, at some point, get legal help. You just do now in this day and age. And I just want you to know it's basically $10,000 a person. So, the family that I'm close with, I took them to a couple of appointments. It was, I think, $22,000 for their family to get that legal help. And these are people, the mother is on the night stocking shift at a Walmart and paying taxes and all of that, and the husband works in construction. So I just wanted to share that, because when I heard that, even though I've been very involved in all of this, I thought it was wrong, and I wasn't hearing right. So just to add a little color.
If you're a criminal in the United States, you're entitled to more benefits than you are as an immigrant. As a criminal, we provide legal counsel. As an immigrant, you're on your own. And Kristen is right. You cannot get through this system. It is so complicated at this point. You cannot get through this system without, without an attorney. So that's one of the many reasons that we have so many undocumented immigrants. They don't have the $22,000 to get a family through the system. It's really incredible.
Jenna, thank you.
Thank you very much.